The first time she looked at me that way, I felt a pull I couldn't name. Her voice, soft but insistent, whispered, "Trust me," and something in me obeyed before my mind even had a chance to protest. I didn't know then that trust could be a rope, binding and heavy, capable of pulling me into depths I wasn't ready to navigate. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, a fleeting touch, yet it lingered long after it ended, igniting a warmth I didn't want to name but couldn't ignore. There was a rhythm in the space between us, unspoken, electric, almost dangerous in its restraint. We were strangers and confidants all at once, each step closer revealing pieces of ourselves we had carefully hidden from the world. Every glance carried the weight of questions neither of us dared to ask aloud. There was laughter too, fleeting moments that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, but beneath it was a tension that hummed, quiet yet insistent. Something about her drew me in and held me there, and I found myself teetering on the edge of surrender, willing to let the line between caution and desire blur. I remember the first night she let me in, not physically, but emotionally, in a way that made the room shrink around us. Her eyes searched mine, daring me to follow, daring me to trust. And I did. I gave myself willingly, thinking I was ready, believing in the promise behind her words. But there was something hidden, a shadow beneath the softness, a current I hadn't felt before. It whispered that I might not return unchanged. I tried to hold on to myself, but every heartbeat, every brush of her hand, every word she spoke chipped away at the edges of who I thought I was. By the time the night ended, I realized I had lost more than I expected. The room was silent, yet it still hummed with the echo of what had passed, leaving me suspended in a moment that was too intimate, too charged, and impossibly incomplete. And there she stood, calm, composed, a half-smile curling at the edge of her lips, as if she knew something I would only discover too late. The air between us thickened with every word we didn't say. We moved through the room, pretending to tend to other things, but our attention always snapped back to each other. I noticed the way her hair fell across her face when she tilted her head, the faint catch in her breath when I stepped closer than necessary. My own heart betrayed me, hammering in my chest at the smallest of brushes, a hand passing near mine, a shoulder grazing mine in passing. There was no urgency, no rush, only a slow, simmering awareness that made the space feel electric. She spoke softly, almost as if testing the limits of her own voice. "You're quieter than usual," she said, her eyes scanning mine with curiosity, maybe even caution. I forced a calmness into my voice, but it faltered. "Just thinking," I replied, though my thoughts were anything but calm. Her gaze lingered, assessing, probing, and in that silence, I felt more exposed than I had in years. I wanted to speak, to tell her everything, the fear, the pull, the undeniable tension, but words would ruin the moment. So I stayed quiet, letting the energy stretch taut between us, a wire ready to snap. We drifted closer again, accidentally, or perhaps deliberately. I couldn't tell, and neither could she. Our eyes met and held longer than reason allowed, and for a moment, it felt as though the rest of the world had slipped away. I wanted to ask her why this felt so easy and so impossible all at once, but the words stuck in my throat. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift of our bodies was loaded with meaning, yet none of it had to be spoken aloud. I caught myself watching her when she didn't notice, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hands moved when she was unaware of my gaze. She caught me once, our eyes locking, and I saw it there, the recognition that neither of us could deny. There was longing, yes, but also caution, a silent agreement that we were standing on the edge of something neither of us was ready to name. And in that charged stillness, I realized that the more I wanted her, the more I feared losing myself again. Yet, even as my mind protested, my body, my heart, insisted otherwise. We were caught in a dance we hadn't choreographed, each step a question, each glance an answer, and neither of us wanted to stop. There was a pause in our rhythm, a quiet hesitation that neither of us could name. I wanted to bridge the space between us, wanted to close the gap with a touch or a word, but something held me back. Her presence was intoxicating, but it carried the weight of unspoken truths, shadows in her eyes, a guarded tilt to her jaw, secrets I sensed but couldn't reach. And maybe that was what terrified me, the idea that I could step too close and unravel something neither of us was ready to face. She reached for a cup on the table, and our fingers brushed. It was brief, accidental, but the spark lingered longer than it should. I felt my chest tighten, my thoughts scattering. I wanted to hold her hand, to let the electricity flow, but the moment was delicate, and I feared breaking it. Instead, I pulled back slightly, though my gaze never left hers. She noticed, of course. I saw the flicker in her eyes, surprise, longing, and maybe disappointment, and my heart ached at the knowledge that we were both craving something we couldn't claim. We spoke, carefully, about inconsequential things. A movie she liked, a book I'd been reading, the mundane textures of life that somehow felt charged in her presence. Every sentence was layered with intention, every laugh a subtle test, every silence a conversation in itself. I wanted to ask her about the walls I could see, the fears she carried, but I didn't. I wanted her to tell me when she was ready, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if she ever would. There was a moment when she leaned forward, just slightly, as though our faces could almost meet. I felt my breath hitch, every nerve alive with the possibility. And then, just as suddenly, she shifted back, a soft exhale betraying the restraint she fought to maintain. I mirrored her movement, pulling away not from disinterest, but because the desire was too much, too heavy to name aloud. We were suspended in a charged equilibrium, the world narrowing to the tension in that tiny space between us. In that quiet, I realized how tightly we were bound by longing and fear, desire and caution, the push and pull of hearts that wanted more than either could safely admit. And yet, neither of us left. Neither of us spoke. We stayed there, on the edge, alive with the heat of what could be, yet haunted by what might never happen. The room seemed smaller now, each shadow, each beam of light drawn tight around us. Every glance carried the weight of unsaid words, every breath seemed louder than it should, each heartbeat a drum in the quiet. I could feel her presence in a way I never had before, electric, insistent, impossible to ignore. We weren't touching, yet the space between us seemed to vibrate, a thin membrane holding a force we both feared and craved. "I can't stop thinking about you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words landed like stones, skipping across the surface of something fragile inside me. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't even draw a breath without feeling it catch. She waited, eyes searching mine for a response, a signal, a confession of my own. And there it was, raw and undeniable, the truth I had tried to bury. I wanted her, more than I had ever wanted anything. The air seemed to thicken, every subtle gesture amplified. She shifted closer, and I felt it in my bones, though our bodies had not met. Fingers brushed the edge of a table, almost reaching, almost touching, and I imagined the spark that would ignite if we did. We leaned in, ever so slightly, the gravity between us pulling tighter. The world narrowed until nothing existed but the possibility of what could happen, a soft, tremulous thread connecting our breaths, our pulses, our very hearts. Her gaze fell, then rose again, searching, daring, inviting. I wanted to close the distance, wanted to bridge the gap with everything I had, but something held me, not fear, not doubt, but the sheer weight of wanting, the knowledge that once we crossed this threshold, there would be no turning back. So we hovered there, suspended, every second stretched taut with anticipation. And then she leaned forward, just the smallest, almost imperceptible motion. My hand itched to reach, to hold, to anchor this moment, but I stayed still, letting the tension speak louder than action ever could. We were there, on the brink, hearts raw, souls open, the room vibrating with a heat neither dared name. And in the silence that followed, every unspoken word, every longing glance, every tremor of breath carried the promise of something inevitable, but not yet realized. The rain tapped gently against the windowpane, a soft rhythm that matched the quiet storm in the room. Warm light spilled from a single lamp, pooling over the edges of the couch and the floor, casting shadows that danced with every movement. I could feel her near me, not touching, yet every breath, every heartbeat, was a thread weaving us closer. There was no rush, no urgency, only the electricity of presence, of longing finally allowed to surface. Her eyes found mine, and in them I saw the weight she had carried, the walls she had built, and the surrender she was offering now, even in silence. I wanted to speak, to name everything, the fear, the desire, the hunger that had been growing between us, but words seemed unnecessary. Our proximity spoke more clearly than any sentence could. Her hand hovered near mine, a breath away, and when our fingers brushed lightly, it was as if the air itself had ignited. Her breath melted into mine in the softest of exhalations, a quiet confession of everything unspoken. My chest pressed closer, not in haste, but in search of a connection deeper than words could reach. The warmth of her shoulder against mine, the curve of her cheek catching the light, spoke volumes. Our bodies, hesitant yet certain, began to converse in gestures, in movements so subtle and tender that it felt as if time had slowed to accommodate us. Every shift, every sigh, every glance carried a language only we could understand. We leaned together, a careful approach that felt like a revelation. The heat between us was not fevered but deliberate, like two flames finding their rhythm in the darkness. She rested her head against my chest for a moment, and I felt the steady pulse of her heart, a quiet drum of trust and surrender. The room held its breath with us, the rain outside marking the cadence of something sacred unfolding. Her lips curved into a smile I had longed for without knowing it, a softness that seemed to say, finally. My own lips moved closer, and though we did not speak, every brush of skin, every heartbeat, every small tremor was a declaration. Our bodies spoke the words our voices could not. I am here. I am yours. I have wanted this for so long. The tension that had clung to us for weeks dissolved, leaving only warmth, vulnerability, and a breathtaking intimacy that was felt rather than seen. We stayed like that, suspended between desire and serenity, letting the night cradle us. The storm outside mirrored the one we had contained inside, now released in quiet, elegant surrender. And in that room, in that moment, nothing else existed but us, the soft rain, the golden light, and the undeniable truth of finally letting go. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and unrelenting, casting everything in a gentle, unflinching clarity. The room smelled faintly of rain and warm coffee, a quiet reminder that the world had continued while we were suspended in our own night. She lay curled near me, her hair spilling across the pillow, and I traced the line of her shoulder with my eyes, trying to reconcile the heat of last night with the hush of this morning. Neither of us spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary and yet impossible to avoid. The quiet carried its own weight, a mixture of satisfaction, uncertainty, and a hint of guilt neither could name aloud. I wondered if I had crossed a line I wasn't ready to own, while she seemed lost in thought, lips slightly parted, eyes distant yet alive with something unspoken. Our closeness was undeniable, yet the vulnerability left us both fragile. Finally, she stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Morning," she whispered, her voice low, almost hesitant. I smiled, a small, wobbly acknowledgement that mirrored her own, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the intensity of what had passed. We were tethered by an invisible thread, strengthened yet complicated by the intimacy we had shared. The air between us felt thicker than it had the night before, heavy with emotions we hadn't unpacked, yet richer for having let ourselves feel. I wanted to ask her everything, what it meant, if it was love, if it was escape, if it was a mistake, but the words caught in my throat. And then, a sound at the door startled us both, a knock, hesitant yet deliberate. My heart leapt, who would come now, breaking our fragile bubble of quiet? She rose, brushing her hair back, and opened it, revealing someone unexpected, a figure from her past, a truth we hadn't anticipated, staring at us with a mixture of surprise and recognition. The room seemed to shrink, tension layering over tension, the past intruding on a present we thought belonged solely to each other. Yet in that moment, even with the shock, the connection we shared was undeniable. Our eyes met across the room, a silent acknowledgement that last night had changed everything. Whatever lay ahead, guilt, confusion, or revelation, we had touched a truth together, fragile and real. And even as the day began, messy and uncertain, there was no denying the thread that now bound us, one that neither could ignore nor undo. The weeks that followed moved with a quiet intensity, each moment stretching with the weight of what had passed. We spoke less in words, but our silences carried everything we couldn't say aloud. When we walked together, it was slow, measured, a deliberate closeness that neither of us rushed. There was a new rhythm now, one built from the trust and surrender of a night that had changed everything. One evening, we sat side by side on a balcony, the city lights flickering beneath us like distant stars. She rested her head against my shoulder, and I felt her breath warm against my neck. It was a gesture so small, so simple, yet it spoke volumes, an unspoken promise of presence, a quiet acknowledgement that despite everything, we were here, together. I pressed my lips gently to her forehead, a tender seal on the vulnerability we had shared. In that moment, the world outside didn't matter. We didn't need fireworks or declarations. There was only the steady heartbeat of two people choosing each other, quietly, fiercely, finally. I realized that love didn't always roar, sometimes it settled into the spaces between words, into the small touches, the soft looks, the choice to stay. And staying was not easy. It required patience, courage, and the willingness to confront the shadows of fear that still lingered. But it was worth it, every hesitation, every sigh, every quiet heartbeat. We didn't speak of promises or plans. We didn't need to. There was a language in our closeness that required no translation, a poetry in the way we existed together. And when she whispered my name softly, a sound full of trust and warmth, I knew we had found something rare, something that survived hesitation and longing, something that felt like home. As night fell, we remained there, leaning into each other, the city hum fading into the background. Lips on foreheads, hands lightly intertwined, hearts aligned in a quiet harmony. We had lost ourselves once, but together, we had found a way back, not as the people we were before, but as the people we were meant to be.